cannot remember it. And I would go there like every night on the weekend. I would walk down to Brown's by myself, hang out, then go over to the little music venue.
Yeah, you're making assumptions that I'm this kind of happening social person.
No, well, there's nothing social about what I did.
I said neo-Luddite in the beginning. Let's be clear here.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's more like I spend most of my time up on the Rensselaer Plateau, and
good deal.
So,
yeah, I loved Troy. Like honestly, like for what it was just a fun little place. You know, you had like Albany, Schenectady, and then Troy, and like Albany. They all three like crap the bed around, you know, whenever after industrialization and all that nonsense, and then it kind of Troy was the one that was able to pick back up. And I haven't been to Schenectady in a while, but that just kind of seemed like it fell apart. And people in Troy, actually, it was weird. They seemed to like care about their little city. I lived in like an alleyway, and I love that like cut through.
Yeah, it's a fairly walkable town, which is nice. It doesn't feel as car centric as a lot of towns are, although it is still somewhat car centric.
Yeah,
and that's I think the nicest thing about it. But I don't take advantage of the cultural amenities that are available to me in the way that I could.
Yeah. I feel like there wasn't a whole lot, was there? I don't know. Maybe there were. I don't know. I know that they had a banging Flag Day parade. It was like their thing. Always made me laugh because it was always like, well, like nobody has like Flag Day parades, right? Like what the hell's Flag Day? But they had one, and I don't know. I don't think I ever actually went to it. But it was like all the talk, like, "Oh, are you going to the parade?" And no, I hate parades. I hate them. Let me go stand in the sun, get burned, and do nothing with my time or my life.
Stand on pavement for hours.
Yeah, right. Like just to see like the fire truck go by and like blow its horn and throw me a piece of bubble gum. Pass.
Banging Flag Day parade. You are terrible fucking anarchist. They're been fucking status pile of trash.
Be honest, I don't actually know what the meaning behind Flag Day is. Is it just another military holiday, or is there something more?
It's my birthday. It's also Donald Trump's birthday.
A child of the flag.
Just for the record, my birthday is Memorial Day. So
I don't know. I should know. I think it's more to do with like celebrating the flag. Like this is when the flag was made, kind of thing. Like
okay, so it's literal.
I don't know. I'm probably all wrong.
Sounds like a UN thing to me. I blame everything off on the UN though.
But it's one of those holidays.
Flag Day is a globalist conspiracy.
You don't even get the day off. You still like got to do everything. There's like, it's like, whatever. Just another day with another title. Who cares?
That's what the flag's all about. Get back to work.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to Free Markets Green Earth, episode number 47. I'm Nicky P, here as always with Ben, the Liberty Hippie. How we doing?
What's up, Nicky? How you doing?
We're doing okay. This week we have an interesting guest. We have Mr. Bellamy Fitzpatrick, who I believe described himself as a green anarchist, which just sounds like a fun life to me. I could be wrong, though.
He's shaking his head.
Well,
let the man describe himself.
Sure, I mean, labels are always complicated. It's not a label I would refuse, but sure, anarchist.
Okay. Yeah. So I've actually heard you do a bunch of stuff now, and I feel like you sound like an interesting guy. I first heard you on Mance Raiders podcast, or Pete Quinones, whatever he's going by this week. I don't know. And then you sent me a very long conversation you had with Mr. Sue, which I enjoyed.
Yes. 2
and then
hours. Quite the conversation.
I'm going to be honest that's with libertarians, that doesn't seem all that odd. Like we usually get it. We usually hit our stride about an hour and a half in. And
okay.
And if I didn't have to edit this, I would totally be okay with that too. But I've learned I don't like editing anything over 45 minutes if I can avoid it. So, but yeah, it gave me a lot to think about. And I think the most interesting thing to me is that you're definitely someone of the left. But the fact that you were even willing to talk to people who, admittedly have divergent views from you, it immediately strikes me that you have to be somewhat different because, you know, keeping to your ideological corner seems to be what what the left does best. Like, just if something doesn't jive with them, stay the hell away from it and then just scream louder. So
Mm-hmm.
how do
Well,
you feel about that? I know I'm coming right out the gates on you here.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's good. I'm curious what it exactly made you say that I seem like someone of the left, and you can answer that in a moment. I definitely came through that trajectory. I'm not going to repeat things that I said on that podcast, but I do consider myself very much critical of the left broadly and of left anarchism in particular. There are many ways in which my own milieu, so to speak, alienates me and is alienated by me. And that has to do with these sorts of critiques of large scale organizationalism, critique of the idea of violent social revolution or insurrection, as many anarchists of that broadly left milieu like to use to differentiate themselves from the idea of an organized social revolution. I see that kind of strategy as ethically and strategically failure, as history points out. And I also am someone who's very influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche and Max Stirner, both of whom were critical of the left in many ways and sort of critical of like leftist psychology and leftist morality. So maybe you can say what you think about that, but all of that
No,
has...
I think you actually just said exactly what the issue is that you come off as someone who is given due thought to things. I mean, one of the few things from my days on the left, a part of the thing that made it easy from when I was there is because it was real easy to go with your gut, with your feelings, and then just parrot a lot of the like just the very broad strokes that they had.
Mhm.
And I think if that's where you stay, like it's a nice, comfortable place to stay. For me, I know the poison pill was that I wasn't comfortable staying anywhere. I always wanted to know more, and I felt like the more I learned, the more I picked up. It's like there's some serious glaring contradictions in a lot of things, and maybe the reasoning behind things is it's positive, but if it doesn't work in the end, then what in the hell are we fighting for?
Mm.
That's like I said, I found Chomsky, and then eventually I was reading Tom Woods, and then wound up where I am now.
Sure.
It was a weird path. I will give you that. It's from the chuckle he just gave folks.
Well, because Chomsky is sort of the anarchist who isn't, right? The most famous anarchist who isn't.
Mr. Syndicalist.
If even, I mean, a lot of what he says is softer than that. You know,
I agree.
There's. I'm guessing you're not familiar with the anarchist thinker and author Bob Black by any chance?
No, not at all. That's an interesting name.
He wrote a very long form critique of Chomsky, where he points out that Chomsky's well-known book, Chomsky on Anarchism, which the back of the book says, we all know what Chomsky is against, US foreign policy and so forth. Let's talk about what he's really for. And it's, a decent sized book. It's probably 200, 250 pages. There's almost nothing about what he's for. It's not really clear what he even would like to see.
There's absolutely that. Interestingly enough, the reason I fell into Chomsky in the first place is because I found him as a linguist.
Mm-hmm.
I was studying, that kind of stuff in college. I had a degree in communications. I was really, really interested in language. And if anyone who doesn't know, like nobody is more preeminent than Chomsky when it comes to language and linguistics and things like that. He's smart. The problem is that he does a lot of talk, almost more talking about politics, and is probably not as forward a thinker in that department as people want to give him credit for. But he is a good gateway if you want to find other people.
Yes, I agree.
Well, I remember, and I think for part of, I think he's a soft landing. Like he's. He gets the credibility for it, but like when you really get into it, what's there? It's just kind of like an arrow to find more stuff, perhaps.
I think what's to find there is a sort of fake edgy, but ultimately safe thinker whose name that you could drop at cocktail conversation and, sort of seem like a political intellectual.
I think he'd be happy about that. I think he seems like the kind of guy that likes cocktail parties. So I guess the big question I want to have right now is like, so what exactly is the kind of lifestyle that you're subscribing? You say you have a lot about what Chomsky said he wasn't for, and not a lot, but what he is for. But what are you for? What is the idea and vision you have?
I see us as living inside of what I prefer to call Leviathan, which is a massive conglomeration of states that operate almost like a unified state, which is what we're converging toward, although I don't know that we'll actually reach it. And at the same time, we have this industrial consumerist way of life that, and now all your audience is gonna be like, oh, he's a leftist, that is destroying the earth, and that is making many people miserable. Many mental illnesses, depression is on the rise. Suicide, I believe, is the 8th highest killer in the United States, something like that. And it's a way of life that I believe both cannot go on and should not go on. And what I would like to see in my sort of wildest imaginings would be a project of massive decentralization at the same time as the existing system is falling apart under its own contradictions, and people converging toward a way of life that is based on small communities in mutuality with their land bases, living in ecological harmony with their land bases. I believe that this is the sort of natural good for humanity to be living in that form of life. And I do think it would have to be a lower technology level way of life as well. And I remain open to having that falsified, but thus far, nothing I've encountered has made me think that we won't continue to both damage our psychology and our ecology by progressing technologically.
Go Ben.
No, I just because I remember you had mentioned that and something I had heard you talking about. And part of me really likes that, right? Like I would love to see like little enclaves of people working together, sort of in agarist connection, doing all that. But at the same time, I think to do that, your ecological footprint, if you will, is going to have to be much bigger, right? Because you lose some of the as you scale up, right? It becomes easier to do some things as you increase industry, as people specialize, you are more efficient, right? If you have smaller groups of people, like it's harder to get what you need from that small piece of land, or that, like, I feel like you have to spread more in order to kind of get what you need out of things, as opposed to like, I don't know. And I say,
I'd love to hear you walk me through this, because I think quite the opposite, but it depends on what you mean. If you're imagining consuming in a fashion similar to what we have now, then yes, you would have to rely on a greater level of transporting goods around. And that's why some of these kind of techno-positivist green people say, oh, what we actually need to do is make people live a lot more densely. Like someone like Edward O. Wilson, the famous biologist, thought that thinks, actually he's still alive, he's quite old, that the way to conservation is to have everyone move into hyperdense cities and then let much of the landmass go back to being wild or semi-wild. And so in that sense, we could be more efficient, quote unquote, in the sense that you wouldn't have to transport things as much, but you'd still be producing all these non-biodegradable wastes. You'd still have extractivism as we have now, where you end up with these kind of nightmare conditions, like in Mongolia, where they process the rare earth minerals and they have these huge toxic lakes and so forth.
Ben, I think he's listened to our podcast before. He's complaining about the same shit we complain about.
I confess I have not listened to your podcast. I tried to make time to listen to it this week.
It's better that way.
Yeah.
I'm going in raw.
I honestly didn't assume you had, but But I think the things that you're complaining about, like I would actually argue, I know neither of us, I don't think consumerism is an end goal. I certainly think it is a negative. Personally, I think that, but I think of that as more of a societal, like an error, like something that we don't necessarily need. Like we can get rid of, perhaps not easily, but like that, the idea that we have to consume is a bad idea, and in part, it's one that is kind of forced by the economy that we've been forced to have. Like I look at that as more of an economic issue than a technological issue. Just because you have technology to do stuff doesn't mean you have to do it. You know, hence why I'm sure both of us will sit on that decentralization thing. And like I love the idea of decentralization because the idea of kind of being able to pick and choose the level of involvement with the larger society you want to have should certainly be on the table for everyone. And I definitely have a feeling that when you have the option to see what you have between those two, I think a lot of people would choose to kind of go and live more of a back to earth sort of lifestyle. I don't think everyone would, but I think it would actually show in a lot of how, like you say, there are psychological things that are more difficult about this lifestyle, or of the current technological lifestyle, for sure.
Yeah. Constantly. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
No, I was watching a show the other night. I won't tell you what it was because y'all make fun of me, and that's okay.
I sure will.
But it was, like you think back, like 100 years ago, you weren't connected all the time. If I was supposed to meet Nicky at the gas station on Sunday for a picnic, I had to send him a letter, right? That's how it worked. And if he didn't get the letter and I showed up, I had to deal with that. And you couldn't go through your day like that. You couldn't let that destroy your life. You couldn't let that be something that you got all worked up about. And today that's something that we are hooked in all the time. Like you always know where someone is. You always know what's going on. And it's totally, it is draining in what we do. But at the same time, I think, I don't know, sometimes some of these technologies and stuff, I think they kind of do, they have their role, and I think it's a matter of self-discipline sometimes to kind of dial yourself back a little bit.
Well, it presents like there's the two big questions. We watched and talked about 2 episodes ago that new Michael Moore Presents Planet of the Humans documentary, and I love it because it points out things that like me and Ben talk about all the time, in particular like kind of the scam that is the what do you call it?
The green tech.
Mainstream environmentalism.
Yeah.
Well,
like green. Kind of.
And as we would point out, well, it didn't really talk about the green tech that we have that actually does kind of work. It focused on the ones that don't, because it's the people that were promoting the film have a very specific goal in mind. And that is the one question that I do have for you. Like, do you see population decrease and like less people as being like the end goal, or I mean, or is that like the core of what you want to work for? That's because that's what I see. Like you look at what's going on with Bill Gates. What does he want? Population decrease. You see,
he's quite creepy about it, actually.
well, no, what's creepy about
it
is when you tell people that that's his thing. Like, but that's not what he means. I mean, no, he said it in TED Talks. He means less people. Now, granted, he's not talking.
Many of the elite want this, actually.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I would argue that they kind of ignore the fact that the more technologically advanced the society is, the less we tend to reproduce. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
But the other thing that I definitely. The one, I guess, the big glaring issue that I see is that within what I've gotten of your ideology, what is the line? Like, it seems like there has to be some line at which technology becomes too much. Like, there's going to have to be some arbitrary line which you don't go past. Like, are you allowed to go out and plow your field with a, with a horse-drawn carriage or whatever? Or do you get rid of all the wires and the technology, the computers and things like that? Things that, for all intents and purposes, have made the ability to yield more food for poor people more possible. I'm not saying that we can necessarily do it better than nature, but I can't write that out, because in many ways, Alex Epstein or Epstein would say, like, we've made the world a hell of a lot better for people. So we kind of have to start from a core of people are, we're not animals while simultaneously being animals, because we actually have a, what do you call it? We have an episode way back we started about specifically the idea that human beings are unnatural. And I throw that out just straight, because the fact of the matter is if we have the ability to do it, we are of the earth the same as anything else is of the earth. We, yes, can manipulate the earth more than other things can, but we do the same thing that literally every other thing on the earth does, is we go and try and make our situation more hospitable to us.
Sure. Yeah, there are a few things I want to touch on. So with your last point, Bill Mollison, one of the co-creators of permaculture, he has this expression, everything gardens. So to your point, everything makes the environment more conducive to itself. So yes, we're part of nature, and we're doing what other creatures do. Even when you ferment yogurt, the lactobacillus that's fermenting the yogurt, it excretes acid. This selects for an environment that's better for other lactobacilli. It selects against other bacteria. So even it is taking space, exuding force on its environment. And we're also not the first species to contribute to mass extinction. Other species have. It's actually thought that, for example, so trees, for example, this sort of archetypal, nature image creature, when they first evolved, they probably contributed to mass extinction by altering the atmosphere, by breaking down minerals and eutrophying water around them. So, this is not the first mass extinction we've been through that's caused by an organism just doing what it does. I wanted to touch on something Ben said about, technology, meaning that we're in contact all the time and we have less quietude. That's true that we have less quietude, but we're also actually disconnected, I think, in many ways by the technology that we have. People have fewer friends than they used to. They spend less time with their friends than they used to. People are less involved in civic society and organizations than they used to. Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, talked about this, the sort of decline of social life. And I think a lot of that has to do with the technology that we have, because people just spend more time in their homes. They spend more time on screens. And so even as we're hyper-connected, we're also alienated from each other in many ways. Now, and that's one of my concerns as well.
Well, and I definitely see your point on that. There, to me, like I can tell you that actually kind of works out exactly the opposite for me. I'm actually really, really good at the whole online friendships thing. A hell of a lot better than I ever was at having external friendships. People that I have to go out and talk to, I'm incredibly socially awkward.
You're a creature of your environment.
Well, and that's kind of my point is. So for me, this works out fantastic. Like I have very deep, rich relationships with people that live hundreds of miles away from me that I can have very dense conversations with. That the likelihood of me ever finding anyone geographically near me that is any interest in the shit that I'm interested in, that's almost nil. So it definitely can work out. Now, I also realize that anyone who I think is brought up in our broader culture, as it has been for certainly the past 200 years, and perhaps all the way back, depending on how you want to do that. I know your paper that I listened to today kind of ties a lot of what we deal with into the, Abrahamic religions. And I actually don't disagree with that a whole lot. Like a lot of way things is set up is absolutely from that. That's why I've always kind of just described myself as an evolutionary ANCAP or, an evolutionary anarchist, because I think that that's the logical end point. Like I think complete decentralization and discarding away with the religions and the bullshit that is kind of like maybe been part of the evolutionary ladder. I think without religions, we probably would have killed ourselves off at some point, because it taught us how to, I think it taught us how to civilize in some respects, but I think it's also something that we don't need to stay with. Tools are meant to be used and discarded, I guess, in that regard. And, but like, I think the end goal always is going to be to have free people. But like I said, you definitely, there's something that you, like when you talk, like I love the vision I know personally I'm not giving up my iPhone, and that's kind of where I'm at. But I don't think everyone else has to choose that life either. Like there are definitely things that could work better for other people for sure.
So we only have about 10 minutes, is that right? Or how are we?
We have as long as you want to go, but
Okay.
yeah, if 10 minutes is
Okay.
okay with you, you're there.
I just want to make sure, because a few threads have opened, and I want to make sure I
No, go for your thing, man.
So I didn't answer your question before about what an appropriate technological limit is. Also, the piece that you read, I wasn't trying to say that religion necessarily is a bad thing. I was trying to say that.
Oh no, I added that. That's me.
Okay, yeah, because I actually do. I believe in the philosopher's God. I believe in the God of Plato and Plotinus. I think it's and as described in other religions as well. I don't think God is like a person, but I do think that it's real, and I think there are very good philosophical arguments for this. But the trouble with the point that you made just a moment ago, where you said, I don't think everyone has to have this kind of lifestyle. I think that's a kind of mindset that we get, and I'm not trying to make a dig at you, but it's a kind of mindset that we get with this sort of modern, bourgeois, liberal, multicultural kind of thing of like, oh, you do your thing and I'll do mine and everything's gonna be fine. But the problem is our actions affect each other, right? So if a society is industrial and high technological, it's going to, by necessity, need to keep expanding. It's going to need new horizons. If you are destroying your topsoil, then you're going to need to move into new areas. If you are mining organic matter from one location and moving it to another in the form of fertilizers, you're going to be depleting that land. If you depend on fossil fuels, you're always going to need to be finding new sites, right? So I think that consumption-based industrial societies end up being expansionistic, aggressive societies, just through, not in this like super materialist determinist way, but just from the sort of facts of a culture's metabolism, so to speak.
So I don't disagree with you that is certainly what has come to pass. It's definitely one of the critiques you'll say of like the Greta Thunbergs of the world, that they see endless growth as being a necessity, where I think that that's a lie that was perpetuated.
Like we could have a steady state economy?
Well, I think that if nothing else, I think having an economy in general means things are steady. I think what we have is people kind of forcing people to expand because that's the way that the economy works best for certain people, say at the top of a Leviathan. I do not think that is inherent. I mean, one of the things that definitely has happened technologically is that all of the stuff, we have all the technology, but all of it uses less than it did before. The actual end result of all of our technology is usually it's smaller, more dense than previous generations as we evolve. And so the idea that we have to consume doesn't strike me as being honest. I think that that's a way that the society was constructed on purpose that I believe that we can actually pull away from. I'm not going to say that we don't have to use any resources, and there's definitely a degree to which, good Lord, people talking to me on Facebook. There's a degree to which I don't know. Well, no, that's more about Windows. Well, let me shut off notifications. But sorry, there's a degree to which I can't know. Maybe I'm wrong, and I always leave that. For me, I guess the big thing that I always put up as my flag is that, do you think humans are capable of destroying the planet to such a degree that it's impossible to recover? And I don't see that happening. Mass extinctions have happened more than once, and it somehow seems to rebound. So I guess my big thing that I would say is I would rather bet on human potential than because the alternative, well, either way, we end up gone and the earth figures its way out anyways.
I don't think that we could destroy nature in its entirety. No. There are microorganisms that can survive unbelievable conditions. And even if somehow we were actually able to destroy all of those, which I think is impossible.
I mean, they're living in lava right now.
And they would just come back anyway.
Yeah.
Because life finds a way, as they say in Jurassic Park, right? But I do think we're certainly capable of pissing in our own cisterns. And
oh, absolutely.
Yes. And I also just find it to be a moral and aesthetic crime to destroy all of the lovely beings that we inhabit this earth with in the wanton way that we are. And so even if we were to say, oh, well, you know, they'll recover, I don't find that acceptable personally. And to finally answer your question that I've sort of dodged, I think exactly what level of technology is appropriate is a complicated question. But I do think Jacques Ellul, in his book, The Technological Society, which I think is one of the best books critical of technology that's been probably written ever, he draws a real distinction between pre-industrial and post-industrial. There's another very good book called The Metaphysics of Technology by David Skrbina, who is sort of the heir apparent of Jacques Ellul, I would say, who I plan to actually have on my show sometime in the near future. He interestingly places it around the year 1200 technology of Europe, because he says it's just before the clock was invented, and the clock fundamentally changed human psychology.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
Interesting. If you want to know the truth, so you totally ruined this interview for yourself, because I totally just wanted you to come on and talk about permaculture.
Yeah.
And then you send me that philosophical thing today, and I'm like, God, there's just so much in here to talk about. I'm really excited that you show up ready to cite references and things like that, because, you know, I don't like at a philosophical level, I don't disagree with a lot of what you have to say, and I'm interested in what other people have to say about it. You know, and maybe it's a hard truth to accept kind of thing, but I think that I don't think at any rate that running away from the ideas is going to serve anyone good, because, you know, we do want to do the best for the most people, and we want people to own.
It sounds kind of utilitarian. Aren't you supposed to be against consequentialism because you're a libertarian?
Well, I'm a good person regardless. I think given the choice, that's the choice most people would take. You know, I understand that I may have to look out for me first and foremost, and then I have my bigger circles around me. But eventually, at some point, I do have to concern myself with the world at large, because if nothing else, you would, I'm sure, would agree, nothing that we do is completely disconnected from everyone else. At some point, it's going to affect everyone else. You know, we wipe out a forest, that becomes an important piece. You know, if we decimate all of the land through allowing giant corporations to force us into using fucking petrochemicals to, you know, grow food on the land as opposed to using proper, you know, farming techniques, that affects everyone. You know, the fact of the matter is we do have a lot of people on this planet because we have allowed mass farming to create enough food to support the population. Whether or not that was a good thing in the past, we kind of have to deal with the fact that if we were to ever stop that, a lot of people would die off just off of that technology going away. So even if it was a graceful backtracking, you know, we have to be cognizant of the repercussions to how we affect everything else. So like I said, I certainly appreciate all the information you've brought. I would personally love to have you on again if you want to talk permaculture. Because that's something I'm really interested in. It just, you blindsided me today with that other piece.
I think that's the big thing. I think for me, I love the image, I love the idea, but I just don't see it supporting population for where we are. You know, like the idea that the amount of food we're able to create now, and I don't agree with how it's created. I think it's absolute rubbish, and that's not how I grow vegetables, but you know, that's what it is. And to to take that away, what kind of, repercussions are there?
Well, it's the thing that we always throw in the face of like the Greta Thunbergs of the world is that so for the Bens and the me's and the Bellamy's, we live in America, we're gonna be pretty fucking good no matter what happens. The problem is that we outsource food. We outsource food to all of the other far less, far smaller economies than our own, and we support a lot of people in those places. Like that's what everyone's like. Oh, come on, we'll have some shortages here in America. I'm like, yeah, we'll have some shortages here in America. It might suck, but I think we'll probably be fine in the long run. The problem is that all of our surplus that would go to other countries, well, that's going to be the first to the chopping block when everything's said and done. And it frustrates me to think that, we're having that big of an influence on other countries given our state.
Mm-hmm.
That's the frustrating thing for me. It's like, because like you'd say, none of this affects only us. Mm-hmm. And, centralization. So I got to an argument the other day, and some dude was like pulling out he pulled out his master's degree in history because I was talking about centralization of our farming industry, which he said there's no such thing.
What does he mean?
Just for the record, and this is 2 sentences after he told me someone who's put up every perceivable accolade that they could have on their Facebook page. I'm like, what? Like I put stuff on there in case people are interested in anything I've ever done. I've been in a lot of bands. I produce a lot of content, so I do things. I guess his problem was that I actually go out and do shit, and he has a master's degree, which I assume is in some foreign culture because he didn't tell me which part of history it was in. His master's in history could have easily been in sub-Saharan basket weaving, in which case would have had no knowledge of anything revolving American politics or our structure with our food system. So
I think most people are very unaware of the food system that we have and how it actually works and what it actually looks like and what the costs of it are and so forth.
It's sad.
Well, the big thing is like, because it's set up in such a strange way in that like you have a lot of outputs, you have a lot of inputs, but everything bottlenecks in this very, very small middle. Like, because everything has to go through very specific, processors that are, okayed by the government. They don't allow anything to get through that they don't want to get through. And it's that bottleneck that's actually the problem. If you had regional processors and local processors for everything, it would be a far different system because you could have things happen in certain population centers that wouldn't affect others. You can have maneuverability. The great thing that decentralization offers everyone. But like I said, people don't know that. They just say, oh, well, the food comes from someplace. And, they assume, oh, there's there's probably a butcher somewhere. And, he just
Happy
has the
cows,
FDA. Yeah. Meanwhile, half their meat's like grown here and shipped to China to be processed and then shipped back to us.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And like, they just don't understand that. But I'm like, anyone who's so uneducated as to like not even be aware of that, I'm like, I don't even know how to begin to talk to you about. Like, if you don't understand how the food system works, I don't understand how to begin talking about the political bullshit that goes into it.
I think it's designed that way, right? It's designed that way to keep you unaware of things, right? You go to the store and you know that a gallon of milk is $2 and you buy your gallon of milk and mosey on with your day, and you don't think about everything that goes into it. And I don't know if that's a technological thing that we're just overloaded that we don't recognize that. I don't know.
It's almost as if the complex industrial process alienates the purchaser from the actual process of the thing that they're purchasing.
Yeah. And I can see that. I think to some degree, I think I think the state muddles that. I think if the state wasn't there, it would be a little more transparent. If I could go down the road and get my gallon of raw milk from the farmer and not have to worry about, him paying the FDA to do whatever, or the USDA or whoever it is, right? All that. If I didn't have to label it as pet milk to take it home, it'd be a little bit clearer and I would know more and feel better about it. But I think it boils down to that kind of, the state muddying it up.
Well, and I think that to me strikes me as being like maybe the biggest divide. And I don't even know how much of a divide that really is between us and our worldviews. But I see so much of what we have to deal with as being state enforced monopolies, like state forcing consumptions. Because I mean, especially in the farming industry, literally the state will make farmers make shit and then destroy it.
Yeah, which is so insane.
Yeah. Like, so it's like literally, I can't even make an analogy because they exactly do it. They force consumption and then just destroy it, which just can't even.
Yeah.
But so I see, all of human ingenuity and having all these options, and then the state taking control of all of our options and not allowing us to see how they could be utilized in the best and most economical fashion, because they're being forced to be utilized in certain ways. And it's like Bernie Sanders. He sees so many of the issues that we, like us people on the, I guess I'll say on the right, would see. And then his solution is, let's throw more government at it. Whereas we see all those same problems, but we see, well, no, but it's the government that's the problem. And it kind of, well, how you see the same picture is very dependent on where you come from.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've done this kind of whirlwind tour of ANCAP land the past couple of weeks. So you mentioned I was on Pete Quinones' show, Mr. Sue's show, your show. This Thursday, I'm going to be on Monica Perez's show.
Well, that'll be fun for you. She's a charmer.
Okay.
Hit the big time now.
I'm not sure what that means, but so I'm noticing a common theme, which is this idea that, well, if we could just get the state out of the way, one, and then human ingenuity and innovation, two, would solve the issues that we're in. And I mean, certainly I completely agree with you guys that the state is probably at the heart of it all. I would say it's probably the fundamental issue. But I get disturbed, and I'm not trying to strawman you. But I get disturbed by this kind of promissory note argument of, well, if we just had human ingenuity in the market, then it would work out. And to me, it's sort of, well, how if we are putting toxins into the air, water, and soil, if we're losing topsoil, if we're deforesting, if we're dependent on these rare earth minerals. And sometimes when I say these things, then I get these really what I think of as kind of wackadoodle answers of, oh, we'll do asteroid mining, or we'll do these sort of these technologies that don't exist that hypothetically could exist will at some point in the future. So go ahead.
Go watch the documentary Need to Grow, and most of your topsoil issues will be taken care of there.
Okay.
There actually are a lot of technologies that already exist for this shit, but they're not economical for people in power. That's the thing. Like there's literally space age technology that already exists that we don't take advantage of because somebody who owns the patent for it, who's not one of those people that wants to.
That damn IP law, man.
Yeah. I will first say you are entirely correct that a lot of what we would say, add to the pile of human ingenuity can fix this. That is something we offer. It's just we maybe it's too hopeful, and that we could lean on that. I can say humanity has solved a lot of really complicated problems for ourselves this far. Like we've done really fucking good at that.
Wait,
history would tell us that, but I almost feel like we have a better chance of human ingenuity solving a problem than making the state go away or making the government go away. Like ultimately technology seemed to fix a lot of things that wishing that people wanting power weren't there has never manifested. So it's, I guess maybe it's, I put hope, like I without the hope of technology, there is no hope of anarchism for me.
Wow.
Because for me, nothing has seemed to ever pull the boot of the state off of people's necks other than technology. Bitcoin will be the thing that if we end it all, like it ending the Fed and ending the government money issues will be the one thing that manages to do a lot of things that most of history hasn't been able to do, because kings now, as they always have, when you control money, kind of control everything.
Doesn't the state have, in many ways, doesn't the state have more power than ever? I mean, if you look a few centuries ago at the size of the state, the level of presence that it has in your life, the frequency with which you interact with it, the level of knowledge that the agents of the state have of your life? I mean, isn't technology actually increasing the power of the state in many respects?
This is one of those things that I always kind of Michael Malice would be the person that I really kind of lean towards because it feels like that at times. But largely nobody's pushing 6 million Jews onto a fucking bus right now to be slaughtered.
Okay, but that was only possible at a quite high technological level. I mean that we're talking about a modern totalitarian society when you say that.
Oh, okay. So we just want to take this back to was it Attila? we want to go back to other people throughout history that have slaughtered millions and millions of people. I mean, ultimately, technology has kind of managed to allow us to not have to deal with I feel like strong men aren't as big a problem as they were. Like wiping out entire nations of people is something that happened kind of routinely throughout history. As insane as it may sound, mutually assured destruction kind of keeps people under wraps to a certain degree. Now, maybe that's to manifest a larger control.
But then we just have this new paradigm of proxy wars and, the U.S. funding insurgents, funding terrorist organizations, and then going over and saying, oh, well, now this area is destabilized, so now we have to move in there and so forth.
Okay.
So
I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I absolutely see that. What do you think, Ben?
I don't know. It's one of those things, right? I think yes, to some degree, technology breaks us free, right? In the sense that,
I mean, it does offer us another form of slavery too.
It does, but the government overreach is more on blast, right? More people are aware of it. If a mayor in, middle Georgia does something stupid, everyone is going to know about it, right? Like that ability is there. If they do something really bad, I can publicize that and whatever. At the same time, yeah, you're right. If you want to go dark, it's really hard. It's really hard. And maybe it's not that hard, because like you said, right, some of these technologies, do I really need a cell phone? Probably not, and some of it is there, but at the same time, look, I'd be totally okay with going back a few hundred years and, and just doing my thing, and I'm okay with that. But at the same time, when you weigh the how much life would be lost, changed, not able to survive based on some of the technologies we've developed. It's one of those things. If you could dial it back, right, just go back and forget everybody that was born and all that happened, and cool. But we're here now, and I think dialing it back would have the consequences just aren't acceptable. Or I
could make the argument that governments don't have to work as hard to keep you under their thumbs when you're spending 90% of your time out in the middle of the farm just trying to stay alive. So there's that point too.
And it's harder. I think it was. Yeah, I think it's like you think about the Revolutionary War. How were they communicating, right? It was difficult. It's the same difficulty now if people wanted to communicate and not be intercepted by the government, right? You're going to have to figure out ways. And it's human evolution, I think, right? There's always been, whether it was, 1,000 years ago and, you want to kill the chief, you're going to have to figure it out. Somebody's going to narc on you at some point.
Well, I think technically it has to become broader than human evolution because honestly, to say human evolution, you have to neglect the fact that everything that we do is produced by this earth in some form or fashion. Everything that we require to do what we do, literally any evolution that human beings do means that the earth has to evolve with us and it has to change along with us.
I just mean evolution.
I don't like the
human principles.
No, I know what you're saying.
Ideas.
It's to me it's definitely kind of narrowing things down more than I think that they can be because it almost ignores the effect that we've had on the planet to just say human evolution and not the fact that global evolution has happened. like there are animals that have changed just because human beings are here. Now they would have changed because of a different deer population if we weren't the dominant species. Like things would have changed regardless. That's just because we live in a dynamic system. Bellamy has been awesome with his time here, and I feel bad we're holding him up.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
So
you're fine. There was one last thing I wanted to say, which is
I'm curious if it'll lead into the question I had, and I wanted to finish you up.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, no, so the last question I did really want to ask is, so you've convinced me. I'm ready to go the direction you want to go. How do we do that? How do we make that happen? How do you envision that the forward or the reverse progress? I guess that's the thing I think that really makes a difference. As we were talking about, just ending what we have now means some pretty drastic changes culturally, for human beings in general. Like a lot's going to change. Is there like a way to do that in sort of a soft fashion, or is it just decentralization and people choosing to backpedal of their own volition is the only way to me? Doing it voluntarily is the key, just because if you don't do it that way, inevitably people are going to. It's like the problem with the whole UN 2030 agenda or whatever. It's just that they want to force a lot of people into conditions that they were not raised to expect, and that's not going to be taken well by many.
Is this an agenda to move people to cities? Or?
Oh, I mean, if you were to actually go through their real big list, it's pretty intense and pretty terrifying.
Okay.
And most of it involves depopulation. Like mass depopulation, So I think now that's why they changed it with the Greta. It's about what is it, Ben? Like social justice is like the key to their environmental policy.
Yeah, what is part of it? Yeah,
the watchword of the day.
Yeah, the most terrifying thing in the world, because I don't see anything social or justice about it. Just a lot of dead people when it's all said and done.
So I'll make my last statement and then I'll answer your question.
Okay.
So yeah, we talked about left and right at the beginning, and I think left and right, insofar as they mean anything, they don't mean what people think they mean. They don't actually refer to political positions. They actually refer to dispositions that people have about sort of the facts of reality. And I wrote a short blog piece about this. I'm actually working on a little bit of a longer essay that's can be published by Little Black Cart.
So I need to get you on Peace Freqs, by the way, because that's something I do care very deeply about. If you were to listen to Michael Malice, like the way he breaks down left and right is that if you believe that some people are better than others in any fashion, then you're of the right. If you believe that all people are inherently equal as is, then you're of the left. That's the way he breaks it down.
See, I think that's not quite right. I think it's 3 or 4 things.
Okay.
And I won't go through all of them because
go through it.
Okay.
Yeah, come on, man.
So the first one I think is similar to Michael Malice's point. I think if you believe that the differences that you observe among people, differences in ability, differences in life outcome, are primarily due to social and environmental factors versus primarily due to inborn factors, whatever you think that is, whether you think it's genes or some kind of difference in soul or something like that. That's a left-right difference. The second one I think was the one outlined by Thomas Sowell, in his book, A Conflict of Visions. And it's the constrained versus unconstrained view of human nature. So do you believe that you can perfect human beings? Do you think that you can sort of socially engineer the perfect society? Do you think that humans are basically good and just need to be allowed to flourish? Then you're of the left. If you think that we're always 2 or 3 steps away from barbarism, do you think that, do you have an essentially tragic view of human beings rather than utopian? Then you're of the right. And this is the point I actually wanted to touch on, which is the interesting thing that I see with ANCAPs.
None of that seems to fit for me, just for the record. I didn't fit into any of those things entirely, and that's what's odd to me.
Well, I mean, obviously, they're sort of artificial binaries, and you could have a range of views, but it's sort of which way do you lean? And I think I actually lean the tragic way rather than which is I'm associating with the right, and which Thomas Sowell associated with the right. And so I think what's it?
No, I called you a liar. I was busting your balls.
Oh, okay. So that's why when it's sort of, if we just got the state out of the way, human ingenuity and innovation, I think sometimes our desires are wrong. And so the idea that if we just got coercion out of the way, then we'd be okay because we'd sort of let the human being loose. I think we have to be very careful about what we want, and just sort of being driven by desire and innovation and always striving forward. Maybe that's actually us being our own worst enemy, letting our desires be unrestrained.
What's funny is that, like, the way that you describe that is almost like the most animal thing we can do is also the thing that ends up with the most human thing that we do. Like, following our desires is the same thing every other little living creature does.
But they don't cause problems.
Well, no, that's exactly it. It's funny. It's like, so us doing what, like, say the animals do, and chasing down what makes us comfortable and more well off because of the level of control that we have. Like, it's the very thing that makes us an animal that also leads us to do all of the ingenuity and all of the technological advancement that we do, which is also possibly our undoing. Now, if you were to get into it, like, I guess I would say, like we kind of presented earlier, is that, well, ultimately, if that is how humanity exists in the world, much like any other animal population that, reaches its apex and kind of undoes itself, we would eventually reach a point where we reach the point where we can no longer undo what we've done, and the damage becomes so great that we kind of take ourselves out of the equation entirely.
Yes.
You kind of want to, you kind of have this, like, well, I kind of like people being here, let's just find a better way for people to be here position.
Yes.
Which I will say is very refreshing, considering how many people out there just want less people. And they're honestly more terrifying than that. Or there are people out there that think the only chance or only choice for human beings is to make us go extinct. Which, like, that Planet of the Humans, like, that seems like his goal. Our time's up, let's just go away. So you not approaching it that way, it gives me hope.
Well, actually, when I was in undergraduate college, I helped bring a speaker to the school from the voluntary human extinction movement, and so that it was.
We know well.
Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah. I don't actually feel that way, but I thought he was an interesting speaker. I do think that the way of life that I'm describing would result in a lower population. But,
absolutely, because the density of food necessary just to keep the people alive at that level of effort would not allow this.
Yeah, but I'm not one of these, Pentti Linkola, who died recently, who was a kind of, I don't like the term eco-fascist, because I think almost always it's just a silly throwaway pejorative that has no content. But he sort of was one, and talked about how, we may need to use weapons of mass destruction to lower the human population in order to find balance with the biosphere and so forth. So I'm definitely not on that.
The number of people I see, like, that are legitimately coming out and parroting the idea that we just need to make human beings extinct lately has been really, what is it? Idris Elba, when all this is going on, and it's been coming out a lot more right now. Idris Elba said that humanity is a virus, and the Couve is here to cure the earth.
Was he just being silly, or?
He was saying it in a major outlet. Seemed to be pretty. I think he may have been on Oprah when he was saying that, in fact. But whether or not he was being silly, that's a dangerous thing to be silly about, especially when you're in a position like Idris Elba, who has so many people willing to listen to him. Like, even if that is a joke, like, the people that can just throw that out is kind of frustrating and frightening.
I mean, of course, on one level, there is this natural cycle between animals and their pathogens, right? When an animal population,
I don't disagree either.
Yeah, so. But
it's not like, it's not the idea of, like, well, human beings have an interrelationship with nature, and sometimes we may get out of alignment with that. This is just that, no, human beings are a virus, and they need to be dealt with by nature, and hopefully it just finishes the job. That's what it seems like they're after.
And I mean, he with his comfortable life.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, dude, I've had a lot of fun. The biggest thing that, like I said, that I respect out of you is the fact that, first things first, given all of the options, if I have to choose between, having a boot on my neck for the rest of my life and moving into a permaculture commune with a bunch of other people, like with you, I choose the permaculture commune.
Yeah, I don't call it a commune, but
yeah. Like for me, the way I kind of see it is like I'd like to get rid of this fanciful notion of yards and just replace everybody's yards with food forests. I think that's a hell of a step in the right direction, and it doesn't seem like it would be that much. Like technically, it's less work for humanity.
It's mind blowing how many people like just manicure their lawn, don't realize like what weeds they can just go out and pick and throw in their salad, or like what they could do with their lawn, with their sidewalks, that like that's going to give you food. You're not going to have to like mow it or maintain it. Like it's mind boggling, but that's for another day.
You guys are probably familiar with the history of the lawn, or
oh, it's the most insane thing in the world. Yeah. I mean, the fact that it ever caught on, it makes me like just like, really, that's something people chose to do.
It's we don't have our sheep anymore, but we still
yeah.
I got some goats, man. They can't mow for nothing, I tell you.
Oh, you've goats.
There's like a hole over here, and there's like long grass over there, and then like they eat the trees over there. I'm like, come on, man, finish the grass and then go to the trees. Let them grow a little bit more. But
I mean, I live in the city, but no, Ben's a homesteader down in Georgia.
Okay.
So
he's
in more towards your path than I am.
Yeah.
And honestly, if it were up to my wife, like we'd be more along that path. I've got a garden in the backyard, and that's where we're at right now. So if it were up to me, I would have a giant permaculture forest back.
You're on. Okay.
It's strictly just a matter of I rent. I don't own. Otherwise, I'd have a lot more back there than we do.
When the first time we moved down to Georgia, this is totally like off topic, but we rented, and I put a little garden in the backyard, and she took away our security deposit because she didn't like the fact that the grass was tilled up because there was a garden there. It's like, hey, I guess.
For the record, my landlord doesn't give a shit what I do to the backyard. I can grow whatever the hell I want, but it's more a matter of what's it's growing. And if I can't take it with me, I'm going to be pissed. That's a lot of investment in soil and the trees and everything.
That's one of the things with permaculture, I think, is always kind of, I guess, if you've really settled on where you are. But even then, if you're just going to move and you put some trees in or whatever, make it better for somebody else.
But if you really want to make your hardcore lefty friends minds real, if we're up to me, I mean, my wife have talked about setting up permaculture forests in on 1 acre pieces of land across the country, and then just traveling from forest to forest throughout the seasons. Like that's my ideal life.
There used to be a website that, and I can't recall what it is, and anyway, it listed like if there were fruit trees or like berry brambles, whatever you want to call them, like in certain areas in public spaces, they'd get like pinned online, right? You could go look at a map of like your area, and you'd find like, okay, there's like these little, blackberry bushes over there. Or there's, loquat trees over there or whatever. It's fun. We could do all sorts of fun things.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that website, but its name escapes me at the moment. But yeah, it's a very good idea. Many people have trees that they just don't harvest from at all.
Oh my God, I know. Like the amount of trees, like I just driving down the road, I'm like, hey, there's an elderberry, there's a pear tree. Like I saw one guy one time, he's shoveling freaking pears off his lawn with a snow shovel in freaking Georgia into a pile. I'm like, dude, man, like, stop and ask the guy for some pears. But
well, if nothing, I want you to know that like all of us ANCAPs and righties aren't like total lunatics, and we actually do. I hope if nothing else, you get the feeling that we do genuinely care about this stuff. It's something that we do think very deeply about. That's my biggest thing is like people kind of look at like, oh, you guys you're here for the corporations, and I'm like, nah, man, I think most of the corporations have been allowed to grow to sizes that make them completely untenable and do more destruction than the government does in most cases. Maybe I'm a bad ANCAP, but
but I think you get some of those things out of there, like IP law, and they wouldn't be able to grow to such massive expanses. You'd be able to see more of like you wouldn't have these giant co-ops, these giant unions of dairy farmers that say you have to sell milk at X price. Like you'd be able to meet your local market and you wouldn't have to go through all that garbage, you know? I don't know. Anyway, sorry. Yeah. Good night.
Yeah, I don't have the kind of bias against end caps that you described. The only thing that has really turned me off at times has been this kind of you both expressed an aversion to consumerism. I don't see that everywhere. So you brought up Tom Woods earlier. I listen to Tom Woods' shows sometimes. I am in agreement with him about things, but one thing that I've noticed is whenever consumerism
shows for companies, and it bothers me too, just for the record.
Whenever consumerism comes up as this negative thing, he has this very strong reaction against it, which I find kind of ironic, given that he is, as far as I understand, a quite devout Catholic. And I think, well, you know, isn't there quite a bit?
Became Catholic too, just for the record, just weirds me out.
What's that?
He became Catholic. He wasn't Catholic and then turned Catholic.
Oh, okay.
Which is insanely weird to me as a former Catholic. I can't imagine going back to that. Like starting out as an atheist and then becoming Catholic seems really weird to the Catholic turned atheist. We'll just say that.
Yeah, but so to me, it's, you know, isn't there quite a bit in your religion about how avarice and consumption and unrestrained desire are bad? But whenever it comes up, he has this really strong reaction of, you know, oh, these intellectuals criticizing ordinary people just because they want to make themselves comfortable and so on and so forth. And I just don't understand where he's coming from at all.
And like I said, straight off the bat, like he has had a couple people on that really strongly shill for corporatism in a certain sense. And like all these big companies. And I'm like, that's one of the things that turns me off as a person. Maybe that's just because of where I do come from politically. And he comes from, you know, an old school right perspective. That like it turns my stomach. I'm like, Tom, you can't see like how this is different. Like these are giant companies using government. Like it's not like they happened naturally and without, you know, being propped up.
Like, yeah, I mean, people like Walter Block will defend McDonald's, and it's like, on what level is this helping anyone?
I would never necessarily defend McDonald's. What I will say, I guess for me, the approach is that if you attack without allowing things to happen naturally, it's like you can't force people to give up on that, because then you get backlash. For me, it becomes down like the same thing with like the race issue is that anything you do to try and tilt the scales in one direction or the other is going to result in backlash. So when you have like people say, well, we need to spend a couple years like making things more favorable for minorities, I'm like, okay, but you realize then you're going to put the white people in the same position you are in, and then it's just you're constantly flip-flopping. The only way to get to an equitable place is you just have to say, fuck this. I understand. Like, and it's great for me to say, because I realize I'm in the position of, you know, privilege, that it's easy for me to say, you know, well, eventually you'll get where we are. But the thing is, if it doesn't happen that way, it'll never happen. It's just going to be constant and never-ending fighting from one side to the other. It's frustrating because I don't want to, like, I don't know.
I think if we go down the culture wars thing, it's going to be a long topic. So.
Yeah, no. And that's why we need to get you onto Peace Freqs so you and me can hash that one out. That's going to be a fun show.
Sure.
Like, because I fucking hate culture wars of all kinds. And that is the other thing I'll say about Tom Woods, is that Tom Woods really likes the culture war. Like he loves that shit. And for me, like I've never felt on either side of it. So it's very difficult for me.
I mean, I also think if you have a podcast, like Culture Wars gives you a lot of filler. So
it does. It sure does.
A big audience.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we will let you get going, Bellamy. You've already been very generous with your time. I know I told you it was going to be an hour, and hopefully we're not approaching Mr. Sue territory quite yet. I don't know.
No. You're totally fine. And I just want to clarify, I wasn't displeased that Mr. Sue wanted to go that long. I thought it was a good conversation. I was just surprised that he wanted to go that long.
Well, it was interesting because and maybe it seemed like you kind of let your hair down a little bit more.
Quite literally.
You seemed a little bit more guarded when talking to Pete. And I think maybe it was just you kind of feeling out this new world of fan caps that you've come in contact with, because you definitely came across this a little bit more of the left with the Mr. Sue thing. So it was interesting.
But why? Because this is the second time that you mentioned that.
I don't know. I mean, I all I can give you is a sense of it, and I think it's maybe, I don't know. It would be difficult for me to put my finger on that, and that's, we're also strictly talking of, what the hell does left right mean, really? I think maybe it was the manner in which you were perhaps maybe a little bit more willing to talk about your own views as opposed to listen to somebody else talk about theirs, almost. And I think with Pete's, you did a little bit more listening. And so you kind of didn't get a lot of your core. Maybe it's a time frame thing. You didn't get as deep into your own philosophies. That, when you started getting deep into them, they definitely were. There was things that would have, I guess, I would have felt like I had less in common with you in the Mr. Sue interview than I did on the Pete interview, and maybe that's just getting deeper into your own ideology there.
Mm-hmm.
I at no point was turned off. I never said, "Oh, I don't want to have this conversation anymore." It was. I mean, you said you're definitely a good thinker. I respect the hell out of what you have to say, and I probably agree with you on more than not, honestly. So,
it's just funny to me because I'm someone who I wouldn't so much do this in writing or something like that, but I use a phrase like, "Oh, he's kind of a leftist," as disparaging. Yeah. So it's funny to be called one. So,
well, I mean, I honestly refer to myself as a left libertarian more than anything.
Oh,
else.
Really? Okay, yeah. So I didn't realize that.
I mean, which is hilarious because
in terms of economics or in terms of culture, as in mutualism or left market.
Well, and see, that's the thing. I definitely found firmly on the right as far as economics go, but I am as culturally left as they would come. I'm in an interracial relationship, and all I want to do is have acid-fueled orgies for everybody.
All right, there we go, and we're done.
So that's the Thomas Sowell unrestrained view of human nature. So.
But like you said, at the same time, I'm definitely very along the right side, I guess, when it comes to the economics. To me, I was a lefty until I discovered economics and realized, oh shit, none of that makes any sense if you really look through the history of how these systems tend to work. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how my position changed, I guess. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Ben lives a very different life than
I don't know. No, it's one of those, I just think when it the way I came to all this was just my views were so conflicting, left, right, you don't fit. And then you realize that look, what I'm advocating for is your choice. It's your decision, man. It's your choice to do what you want. And I have no say in that, nor should I. And it's how I got here, Alan. I don't know. I get it. And the whole left, right thing, I'd be interested to hear that, dissection.
I mean, I use it more of as a function of, it's just something that it's kind of ingrained in you to use because of the culture that we exist in.
It is. And it's curious to hear kind of that, the idea that left and right, what do they actually mean? What does it actually entail to call someone a leftist, or to be called a leftist, or what does that actually mean?
Well, and it's exactly because, I said, I think of myself as a lefty in my head, but I realize, of course, that if I were in a group full of lefties, I am a horrible, horrible bigot, racist, whatever they have to say about the right. So
I don't know, man. I just want to go
I just want to go plant some trees
and pick some corn and
let's go plant some trees, guys.
Sit under an apple tree.
Well, all right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Bellamy.
It was a pleasure.
You have yourself a good one. We will definitely have to have you on to have that permaculture conversation, though.
Sure. I look forward to it, and the culture wars as well. So
yeah, that's another thing. You're gonna have all the podcasting you can want to have ahead of you.
You don't know the can of worms you just opened.
Ben's like, oh, I need to have you on Homesteads and Homeschools.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So
No, I'm already like, once you hit like stop recording, I'm gonna ask the man.
Yeah, okay, sure.
So, all right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Go out and enjoy nature. All right.